Hey everyone, it's Kenji. We're gonna make 2 batches of pesto today. So I wanted to do this little experiment. You know, pesto, the name pesto comes from, the same root word as mortar and pestle, the pestle from mortar and pestle. So traditionally pesto is made in a granite or marble mortar and pestle, but oftentimes we make it in a food processor these days. So I thought I'd do the two side by side and kind of show you the difference and why you might want to make it in one versus the other. So let's start with the easy one. I've got identical ingredients here: basil, pine nuts and garlic, Parmesan cheese, olive oil. Those are the ingredients of pesto, all right? So I'm gonna make it first the easy way in the mini chopper, the food processor here. And I will just dump everything right in there. So 2 garlic cloves, a couple tablespoons of pine nuts, about an ounce of Parmesan cheese, finely grated, about 2 ounces of basil leaves, a half teaspoon kosher salt. Let's start this chopping. I'm gonna let it chop until it's relatively fine and starts to form a bit of a paste, and then I'm gonna go in with my olive oil. Make sure that the olive oil kind of emulsifies in there properly. So now let's start with about half the olive oil. If you're doing this like in a regular food processor, you can drizzle in your olive oil slowly, and it'll form a slightly more stable emulsion, but pesto's never a super stable emulsion anyway. So what's happening here, basically a food processor or a mini chopper like this, you've got a bunch of whirling blades, right? And so essentially you're chopping up your leaves. You're kind of shearing it in between the plant cells. And so you aren't doing too much crushing action, you're doing a lot more shearing and slicing action, okay? And that's gonna be important as far as flavor development goes. Let's finish off the rest of our olive oil. That was about 1/3 of a cup of olive oil, by the way. Extra virgin olive oil. All right. Food processor, pesto. So now let's try over here. I'm gonna start the same way. Garlic and pine nuts in here, right? I'm gonna start with my salt in there. Well, about half of it in there, let's say, just to get it going a little bit. And then I'm gonna mash this into a paste. So I always like to start when I'm doing using a mortar and pestle. I like to start by smashing a little bit like this, just to get everything a little bit pasty, and then I'll go around, do a mix of sort of smashes and circles and scrapes. It's really that grinding motion, that stone on stone action, that's gonna get you a nice smooth paste when you work in a mortar and pestle. You know, my buddy Daniel Gritzer over at Serious Eats, he's tested this, of course, as have I. You know, I know what the results are gonna be, I know what the difference is here, but he likes to use a wooden pestle in a marble mortar, and he gets like a really, really nice smooth pesto that way. All right, so we got kind of a paste going. Now I'm going to add in my basil leaves. I'm gonna really work these into a paste. You can get it into a very, very smooth paste if you go at it for a long time. Typically, I don't bother getting it super smooth. I'm fine with having a little bit of leafy texture in there. But you can already sort of see the difference between the action of a chopper versus an actual mortar and pestle. And mainly it's that a chopper, you know, shears between plant cells, whereas a mortar and pestle crushes them. The analogy I like to use is if you think of it as a port full of shipping containers. You know, the port of Tokyo, full of shipping containers, and each of those shipping containers contains these aromatic compounds. You know, maybe it's a shipment of perfume or something. And now, the whirling blades of a food processor are kind of like a hurricane rolling in, where it just kind of knocks the shipping containers apart, and they fall based on sort of where their walls already are. You know, so you shear them apart, you might knock them over, but you don't actually crush or open all of those shipping containers. So a lot of the perfume ends up still trapped inside, unreleased. With a mortar and pestle, on the other hand, what you're doing is really crushing. So it's more like if a kaiju, like if Godzilla came to Tokyo and stomped on those shipping containers at the port, crushing them, releasing their perfume. There's the rest of that salt in there. Just get a little bit of abrasion. All right, I'm gonna go in with the cheese, thicken this up a little bit, and that'll help it crush a little more. no matter how you do pesto, it's still pretty fast in the grand scheme of things. You know, it's an uncooked sauce. It goes down pretty fast. Even when you're doing it by hand, it's like, you know, it's a 5 to 10 minute process. This is the part where I like to, you know, really go in a circle like this. Same way as if I was making like an aioli, you know, which is basically just a garlic and oil emulsion, a true aioli that is, garlic and oil emulsion. You go in a circular motion like this and it emulsifies. Alrighty. Alrighty, so here we have our two side-by-side batches of pesto. I'm going to taste them just on their own first. So the one made in a food processor, it's good. It has a bit of a graininess to it, not super creamy. The one made by hand in the mortar and pestle, on the other hand, it has like a silkiness to it, and much stronger aroma. So, you know, that crushing versus shearing has a really big makes a really big difference here. It makes a difference whether you're making pesto, something like this, whether you're making a Thai curry paste, whether you're making something like a guacamole. You know, there's a reason why mortars and pestles, you know, they're one of the oldest cooking tools, and there's a reason why they've stuck around so long. All right, let's cook some gnocchi and try these out, huh? Make sure that we get the same amount in each bowl. It's an uncooked sauce, so you don't want to actually cook it anymore once it's done. Instead, you just want to get a little bit of the pasta water. Add it to the pasta. Okay. And then I'll start with my my handmade version. Put a couple spoons in there. And what's going to happen is it's going to emulsify and should turn nice and creamy. You see how it turns from a sort of dark green into this nice creamy emulsified more pale green as it combines with the pasta water. All right, so that is our handmade pesto. Now let's try our machine-made pesto and see what we got. All right, I don't know if you can see this. You probably can. All right, so the handmade pesto, it has this really nice, you know, almost like a heavy cream-like texture to it. That's the creaminess of the emulsion you're forming when you pound versus shear. Whereas the pounded pesto, it still looks good. Don't get me wrong, it looks good, but it's not as creamy. It definitely looks a little more grainy. Let me taste them also. Handmade pesto. Creamy and delicious. Nice. Tasting machine-made pesto. Also delicious. Not bad by any means. Less flavor, less aroma. The texture is not quite as smooth. Handmade pesto, hands down. You know, that said, this one's real easy to make. This one takes a lot more work to make, so ultimately the choice is up to you. Anyhow, guys, gals, non-binary pals, I'm going to call my family over for dinner. I'm going to finish making the Caesar salad. Pesto, I will see you next time. All right, bye.